On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, which led to America's entry into World War II and the defeat of Germany, Italy, and Japan. But what was the real reason behind Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor? Many people believe that the Japanese wanted to take over the Pacific, and the American fleet in Hawaii was an obstacle, so they attacked by hardware. However, this explanation is only partially correct. The role of U.S. political and economic decisions in Japan's considerations leading up to the attack, and the role of Japan's own leaders, have been overlooked. The President, Secretary of State, and the U.S. military high command were increasingly concerned about the expansionism of the Japanese Empire in Asia and the Pacific. To combat Japanese aggressiveness, the U.S. government resorted to a policy of trade restrictions and sanctions, hoping that economic hardship would force Japan to moderate and avoid a war between the two nations. Roosevelt's measures achieved their economic objective by raising Japan's shortage of vital resources. However, the initial economic success of the American decisions led to a failure at the strategic level. Instead of seeking a diplomatic solution, Japan opted for the military route, leaving the U.S. on the brink of knockout at Pearl Harbor, and embarked on a mad dash across the Pacific, conquering territories held by Great Britain and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. The embargo was an economic success but a strategic failure, and the tragedy of Pearl Harbor was a result of a series of miscalculations on both sides. The Japanese leadership was aware that they could not win a prolonged war against the United States, but they believed that a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor would destroy the American fleet and make it impossible for the U.S. to intervene in the Pacific. Furthermore, the role of Emperor Hirohito in the attack and the war needs to be reconsidered. Recent information shows him to be much more warlike and bellicose than he has been made out to be. The modern Japanese state began in 1868 with the Meiji Restoration, and during the long empire of 45 milestone years between 1867 and 1912, Japan underwent an intense process of modernization and industrialization in all aspects and became a first-rate military power. Japan defeated Russia and China in particular wars, was on the winning side in World War I, and conquered Taiwan, the Idong Peninsula, China, and hundreds of islands in the Pacific. Japan's industrialization was different from that of other Western nations. Great Britain, France, Germany, and the United States had natural resources in their territories to drive their industrial growth, including mineral energy sources and abundant fertile land. Japan, on the other hand, had almost none of these resources, neither coal nor oil nor iron, to manufacture steel, and consequently based its industrial program on imports, especially from the United States. The dependence on the U.S. did not affect Japanese expansion after the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 1905, in which Japan defeated Russia. The American President Theodore Roosevelt negotiated peace between the two belligerents, and both were on the same side in the Allied victory in the Great War. Japan was present at the Washington Naval Conference in 1921 and in 1928, with Emperor Hirohito on the throne, was one of the 15 signatory states of the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which sought to outlaw war as an instrument of national policy. The lessons of the period before the attack show that a sleeping giant awakens, and war is not a viable option for resolving conflicts. The tragic assumption that the U.S. would not respond to the aggression led to a 4-year war in which much of Japan was reduced to rubble with 2 million dead, including those from the islanders. However, by the 1930s, Japan's expansionist ambitions began to clash with those of the United States, especially in the Pacific region. Japan saw itself as the rightful leader of Asia, but the U.S. saw this as a threat to its own influence in the region. Japan's invasion of China in 1937 only increased tensions between the two countries. In response to Japan's aggression, the U.S. implemented a series of economic sanctions against Japan, including an oil embargo in July 1941. This was a major blow to Japan, which relied heavily on oil imports to power its economy and military. The embargo left Japan with only a year's supply of oil, and its leaders knew that they needed to secure new sources of oil if they were to continue their expansionist policies. The Japanese government sought possible solutions to their oil problem, negotiate with the US to lift the embargo, or seize new sources of oil by force. Negotiations with the US had failed to produce any results, so Japan decided to take the military route. The plan was to launch a surprise attack on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, which would cripple the US's ability to interfere with Japan's plans for expansion. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese launched their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, killing over 2,400 Americans and destroying much of the US Pacific Fleet. The attack was a tactical success for Japan, but it proved to be a strategic failure. The US declared war on Japan the next day, and soon after Germany declared war on the US, drawing the country into World War II. In the end, Japan's decision to attack Pearl Harbor was a disastrous miscalculation. The country was not prepared for a protracted war with the US, and its military leaders had underestimated the US's industrial and military might. The US quickly recovered from the attack and went on to defeat Japan in a long and grueling war that saw the use of 2 atomic bombs and the eventual surrender of Japan. Looking back on the events leading up to the attack on Pearl Harbor, it is clear that a combination of factors contributed to Japan's decision to go to war with the US. The economic sanctions imposed by the US played a major role in pushing Japan towards military action, but so too did Japan's own ambitions for expansion and its belief in its ability to defeat the US in a military conflict. Today, the attack on Pearl Harbor is remembered as a tragic and senseless act of aggression that led to the deaths of thousands of people and a long and devastating war. It serves as a reminder of the dangers of nationalism and militarism, and the importance of diplomacy and peaceful resolution of conflicts.